name is Deb Van Dynen. I'm an Associate Professor of English Education at Hope College, and I'm the Director of the NEA Big Read and Little Read Lakeshore programs. The NEA Big Read and Little Read Lakeshore programs are Hope College programs in partnership with many area libraries, businesses, institutions, and organizations. The purpose of the NEA Big Read and Little Read Lakeshore programs is for people to come together around a story. However, it's not just coming together and reading the same story. We really want people to use the book and its topics and themes as a springboard to listen and learn from each other, to learn more about our community and the world at large. Come join us this year as together we read An American Sunrise, a book of poems by Joy Harjo. For our Little Read program, we invite you to read Fry Bread, a Native American family story by Kevin Millard. Please visit our website, bigreadlakeshore.com, to find out more about our events, our programs, our guiding questions, and more about who we are and what we do along the lakeshore. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Big Read event for tonight. We're so glad you're here, and we are so excited about spending this next hour with you and with our Big Read author for this year. As the video said, I'm Deb Van Dynen, a professor at Hope College, and I have the honor of being the director of the Big Read program. Over the past 8 years, our Big Read programs have brought lakeshore readers throughout the United States to Maycomb, Alabama, an internment camp in Utah, a whale ship in Nantucket, across oceans to Haiti, Vietnam, and the Dominican Republic, and even into the unknown of the future. This year, our focus is on Native American history and culture right here in the United States, and we're looking at poetry in particular. Our chosen book, An American Sunrise, explores topics and themes related to identity, memory, spirituality, and the painful history of America's Indigenous people. We're excited to explore these topics with you. And a program like ours is not possible without so many partnerships and the support of many people: teachers, professors, librarians, nonprofit organization directors, and to our participating students at Hope College. We're grateful for all of you, and we're grateful for the Jack Riddle Visiting Writer Series for partnering with us in this event for tonight. One of our Big Read team members, Nancy, is going to introduce our speaker for tonight.
Hello, thank you again for joining us for the Big Read Lakeshore Kickoff event. My name is Nancy Gately. I am a senior English secondary education major, a member of the Big Read team, one of the moderators for tonight, and a proud member of the Pokagon Band of the Potawatomi tribe. As a lover of words, I am always excited to see what the Big Read Lakeshore book is. But when I found out that An American Sunrise was chosen, not only was I excited because it meant the Big Read Lakeshore events would be off and running, but it also meant that a wider audience would learn that Native Americans and our varied cultures and traditions are still alive and thriving, as alive, thriving, and full of history as the land we stand on. Ultimately, we must acknowledge that we in West Michigan gather on the traditional land of the Peoria, Potawatomi, Ottawa, and Ojibwe peoples, past and present. We must honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. We must commit to respecting and reconciling this long history of injustice, as well as committing to be better stewards of this land we inhabit. As a community, we must recognize the ever-present systemic inequities that stem directly from past wrongdoings, and as members of the Big Read team, we as a whole are grateful for the ways in which stories and words can speak truth and shed light to these inequities and wrongdoings, but also provide a way forward towards equality, justice, and understanding. And this is why I'm honored to introduce Joy Harjo. Writer, musician, and current Poet Laureate of the United States, Joy Harjo was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and is a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation. Her many awards include a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Native Writers Circle of the Americas, the William Carlos Williams Award from the Poetry Society of America, the Wallace Stevens Award from the Academy of American Poets, and 2 national endowments for the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship. She previously visited Hope College in the fall of 1993 and in the spring of 2012 through the college's Jack Riddle Visiting Writer Series. Without further ado, here is Joy Harjo.
Well, I'm so honored to be here and to be back with you and in your community, even though it's virtual. I'm here and I have great memories of your community. And when I was asked to uh, show up again, I was invited back, I said, of course. So anyway, I made it. Sorry about a little delay, but I'm here. And thank you for your patience. I'm speaking to you tonight from Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the Muskogee Creek Nation Reservation. To the north, this is where I was born. To the north of us is the Osage Nation, and to the east, the Cherokee Nation. I'm going to sing it's a welcoming song. You know, I was just welcomed with a very nice introduction by Nancy Gately, and then I asked my cousin Joe Sulphur for a song that I could sing when I go to other communities in our language, and he taught me this song. It basically means, well, we're gathered here together. We found our way to each other here, and life is short. So let's celebrate, let's dance. Here we are. And here we go. Ale na le no. Ale na le no. Ale na le no. Ale na le no. Ithlini tukale. Ale na le no. Ale na le no. Hobani hobani. Ale na le no. Ale na le no. Ajalugi magongi. Ale na le no. Heyongi goli. Anyway, it's good to be here on this rapidly heading into winter night. And I'll be reading poems but from American Sunrise and maybe a few from other places. And then we'll open it up about 15 till the hour for Q&A. I have a new book out too called Poet Warrior. It's a memoir about memory. And I think I came to writing this memoir because I was thinking about teachers, about being at this moment, standing at this doorway of my life and thinking about what I have been taught so I could pass it along to those coming up. And so a lot of this is pertinent to an American sunrise. And I'm going to read this little section about becoming a poet because, I mean, it's a strange thing to decide to become a poet, and I didn't really plan it at all. I was an art major and come from a family of artists, but I also come from speakers, and my mother was a songwriter. As I near the last doorway of my present life, I am trying to understand the restless path on which I have traveled. My failures have been my most exacting teachers. They are all linked by one central characteristic, and that is the failure to properly regard the voice of inner truth. That voice speaks softly. It is not judgmental, full of pride, or otherwise loud. It does not deride, shame, or otherwise attempt to derail you. When I fail to trust what my deepest knowing tells me, then I suffer. The voice of inner truth or the knowing has access to the wisdom of eternal knowledge. The perspective of that voice is timeless. I would never have become a poet if I hadn't listened to that small inner voice that told me that poetry was the path. even when I had different plans. All of the other voices of educators and friends, voices of love and concern, told me that poetry was an impossible vocation. They reminded me that I had two small children to raise alone, that I should change my major to education. Then I could teach poetry if I wanted to, be invested in poetry. Instead, I listened to that humble voice that did not need to puff itself up or have approval to be chosen. I have made choices that have made sense to no sense to anyone, but they were the right choices for me. I didn't always understand them either. Even the choice to be a poet is still often a mystery, just as the need to create and make music. When I listen, I am always led in the right direction. That doesn't mean that the resultant path is easy. It might be the more difficult path. You may have to clear boulders, walk through fire after fire, or try to find footing in precarious flooding. You will play the wrong notes and write words that mean nothing to anyone else but you. And you may appear to have followed the wrong path, even though it was the right path, as you fail over and over again. I remain very aware of my failures and often run them obsessively through my mind, which is a failure in and of itself. If I let them go, they can run on their own track until they wear themselves out to nothing. It is better to tend to cultivating knowledge, to learn from all of the many teachers who are part of the catalog of wisdom from which the voice of knowing emerges, including the supreme teacher or the supreme poet from whom all love and knowledge follow. I understand that aching reach of John Coltrane's horn as he called out a love supreme, when he sang praise into forever as a performer in the omnipotent wake of the supreme music maker. Even when we just stand in the presence of our teachers, we are taught. So I think of every poem as a teacher, and even every place or predicament we get ourselves in. And some of our teachers, we love them fiercely, and some of our teachers are so hard on us. And yet often we learn the most from them. So this poem, Break My Heart, opens up an American sunrise. It wasn't the first poem I wrote for an American sunrise, and actually this book came as quite a surprise. I had a list. I was teaching at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, a wonderful academic home for me. And my husband and I were living near our homelands, and every opportunity we followed the Tennessee River. We went all over the Southeast into Alabama, Georgia, and went back to the places, even to some of the houses that had been owned by our families and our people before removal. And I had a wonderful assistant, Jeremy, and so in my office, where my desk was a huge kitchen table, I had a list. We went over this list every week of what needed to be done, and the large projects, including the Norton Anthology, When the Light of the World Was Subdued. Our songs came through, and this writing a book of poetry wasn't even on the list. But one day I knew I was getting ready to leave there because I needed to come home to Tulsa. And I stood out looking at the trees, and I'd been reading a lot of the history, and I know a lot of the history. It's difficult to read. I mean, I can't sit and read through a book of Southeastern Native history it takes me months. I have to lay it down, and then I come back to it because it's painful. And I remember one morning knowing that we were leaving, and I looked out into the trees toward the Smoky Mountains, and I heard my spirit say, what did you learn here? And man, that set off this book of poetry. And of course, I always researched, but then I started in my moments of spare time. I don't call it spare time, but I started even more deeply researching, and found a map of the immigration of my grandfather Menahui, who the book mostly centers on him and his journey from Talladega, Alabama into Oklahoma. But the book opens with "Break My Heart," and which is what I want, a poem to do. I mean, this poem is an ars poetica. Is I want my heart to be open so I can see and know more. I want a poem to startle me, to give me a new jumping off place into understanding. Break my heart. There are always flowers, love cries, or blood. Someone is always leaving by exile, death, or heartbreak. The heart is a fist. It pockets prayer or holds rage. It's a timekeeper, music maker, or backstreet truth teller. Baby, 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 you can't say what's been said before, even though words are creatures of habit. You cannot force poetry with a ruler or jail it at a desk. Mystery is blind, but wills you to untie the cloth in eternity. Police with their guns cannot enter here to move us off our lands. History will always find you and wrap you in its 1,000 arms. Someone will lift from the earth without wings. Another will fall from the sky through knots of a tree. Chaos is primordial. All words have roots here. You will never sleep again, so you will never stop dreaming. The end can only follow the beginning, and it will zigzag through time, governments, and lovers. Be who you are, even if it kills you. It will, over and over again, even as you live. Break my heart. Why don't you? So, in this country, we have a lot of difficult history. Certainly, we have celebratory history, but a lot of the history can be a little difficult. Let's see. But it's really important to tell the stories. I mean, this country is basically a field of stories, a field of personal story. History lives in our personal stories, and I think for me the mythic is like it's like the undercurrent of waters that feed history, that run through history. Let's see. I'm going to read this next from Poet Warrior. But let me keep going here. We have ancestors. When you start studying history, every ancestor, we have familial ancestors, and we know that there's genealogy. Now we've got DNA that connects up stories, sometimes surprising stories. We find out things we don't want to know. And it's a very inexact science when it comes actually to culture. Well, you can't find culture in DNA. And but as a poet, I've come to understand that every poem has ancestors. Every poet has ancestors. In the poetry field, there are music ancestors. There are ancestors in mathematical, in math. There's science ancestors, and so on. And I think a lot about, you can take a poem, for instance, Audre Lorde's Litany for Survival, and look at that poem. I was going to read it to you, but wonderful poet. And she was one of my teachers. Like I said, I've been looking at teachers, and I think An American Sunrise kind of started me on that path, because to get to a Poet Warrior where I'm thinking about teachers, I had to walk back through history. And I had to walk back through, what had happened is, history is a teacher. And so in poetry, I find a path when it becomes confusing. I remember when I looked out into the trees and I was told, what did you learn here? And I'm thinking, how in the world can I fit all this together? How, um, where do I start? And in the poem, How to Write a Poem in the Time of War, the book really started probably with this poem. I'll read this poem, and it started with this line. The first line of the poem is, you can't begin just anywhere. It's a wreck. And it's difficult. I mean, where do you start with history? Where do you start? I remember we would drive around, and one time we passed this area and I could just hear weeping and could feel it. And it turned out to be a place where they gathered people together to force them on the Trail of Tears. And I think a lot of people think that, we were just primitives or savages hanging out in the woods, nearly naked with no culture. And that was not so. We had and have very highly developed cultures, structures, languages, and so on. And we had pianos. One of my great uncles had the largest racing establishment on the eastern seaboard down near Columbus, Georgia. But the soldiers came in at Andrew Jackson's orders and moved us off our lands because they wanted our lands and our eastern seaboard racing establishments, etc. But I was also thinking when I wrote this poem about wars in general. I was watching wars on the news and took one image of twin baby girls who were killed in a bombing in the Middle East, an image that went all over, and I wanted to reach out somehow and include them. But I learned something. You'll hear what I learned when I read this poem. I didn't know this when I started out, and that's what I love about poetry, is finding things or learning something that I didn't know or understand. How to write a poem in a time of war. You can't begin just anywhere. It's a wreck. Shrapnel in the eye of a house, a row of houses. There's a rat scrambling from light with fleshy trash in its mouth. A baby strapped to its mother's back, cut loose. Soldiers crawl the city, the river, the town, the village, the bedroom, our kitchen. They eat everything or burn it. They kill what they cannot take. They rape what they cannot kill. They take. Rumors fall like rain, like bombs, like mother and father tears swallowed for restless peace. Like sunset slanting toward a moonless midnight, like a train blown free of its destination, like a seed fallen where there is no chance of trees or any place for birds to live. No, start here. Deer peer from the edge of the woods. We used to see woodpeckers the size of the sun and were greeted by chickadees with their good morning songs. We'd started to cook outside, slippery with dew and laughter. Ah, these smoky, sweet sunrises. We tried to pretend war wasn't going to happen, though they began building their houses all around us and demanding more. They started teaching our children their God story, a story in which we'd always be slaves. No, not here. You can't begin here. This is memory shredded because it is impossible to hold with words, even poetry. These memories were here with the trees. The torn pocket of your daughter's hand-sewn dress, the sash, the lace, the baby's delicately beaded moccasin still connected to the foot, a young man's note of promise to his beloved. No, this is not the best place to begin. Everyone was asleep despite the distant bombs. Terror had become the familiar stranger. Our beloved twin girls curled up in their nightgowns next to their father and me. If we begin here, we will not make it to the end of the poem. Someone has to make it out alive, sang a grandfather to his grandson, his granddaughter. As he blew his most powerful song into the hearts of the children, there it would be hidden from the soldiers who would take them miles, rivers, and mountains from the navel cord place of the origin story. He knew one day, far day, the grandchildren would return generations later over slick highways constructed over old trails through walls of laws meant to hamper or destroy over stones bearing libraries of the winds. He sang us back to our home place from which we were stolen in these smoky gray hills. Yes, begin here. And that's what surprised me, to know what had happened. There was a song sung into our grandparents, and so that we would have the map. We would have a map to return home. I was thinking, though, and I was reading about ancestors, who are these poetry ancestors. And then I think of those Muskogee songs, those songs that, you sing to breathe, breath is your essence. And I guess when you sing, or even when you speak poetry, you're breathing essence into the world. And I hope my poetry brings essence for goodwill, for honesty, for an ethical stance, for beauty. I'm a sucker for beauty. I'm a hardcore romantic. But maybe instead of reading Audre Lorde's Litany for Survival, which is a wonderful poem, and you can find that poem you could probably find it on the internet, but you should buy her books. And because her poetry influenced me in my poem, the Fear poem, Anchorage. But I'll read this poem for Adrienne Rich, by the way. Now, Adrienne Rich, a major American poet, really wrote about, in the way that I'm also writing about a country that I love. And it's not always easy. She also wrote about the country she loved. And sometimes when you love a place, when you absolutely love it, whether it's a student, a place, it's important too that you have to sometimes stand up and ask the hard questions. And Adrienne did that. She did that with her poetry. And she had a very secure place in American poetry, and then changed her style of writing and her and called so much into question that she was brave. She made a way. I wanted to acknowledge her. I was I was in a hotel room not far from a place she had lived in, Massachusetts, and I was thinking about Adrienne. And I remember when she moved to California, and she was fierce. She was fierce in her craft, her poetic craft, in her vision. And, and this is called By the Way. I've given it time as if time were mine to give. There was a dam larger than Hoover or the president or the patent for the metal creature that sucks up all the dust. Words had to stop and ask permission before crossing over. Oh, sometimes they were wild with the urgency of sweet and leaped. Mostly the rest were kept in the net or swallowed or forbidden language. I want to go back and rewrite all the letters. I lied frequently. No, I was not okay. And neither was James Baldwin, though his essays were perfect spinning platters of comprehension of the fight to assert humanness in a black and white world. That's how blues emerged, by the way. Our spirits needed a way to dance through the heavy mess. The music, a sack that carries the bones of those left alongside the trail of tears when we were forced to leave everything, by the way. I constructed an individual life in the so-called civilized world. We all did, far from the trees and plants who had borne and fed us. All I wanted was the music I would tell you now, within it what we cannot carry. I talk about then from a hotel room just miles from your home in the east, before you fled on your personal path of tears to the west, that worn out American dream dogging your steps. You lived on a pedestal for me then, the driven diver who climbed back up from the abyss, Venus on a seashell with a dagger in her hands. I had to look and followed your tracks in the poems cut by suffering. Aren't they all? We're in the apocalyptic age of addiction and forgetting. It's worse now. But that dam, I had to tell you, I broke it open stone by stone. It took a saxophone, flowers, and your words had something to do with it. I can't say exactly how. The trajectory wasn't clean, even though it was sure. Does that make sense? Maybe it does only in the precincts of dreams and poetry, not in a country lit for 24 hours a day to keep dreams stuck turning in the wheel in the houses of money. I read about transcendence, how the light came in through the window of a nearby traveler, and every cell of creation opened its mouth to drink grace. That's what I never told you. And here I was searching around thinking, okay, who is the poetry ancestor for the poem? How to write a poem in a time of war? And then I go right to Adrienne. And of course, that poem couldn't have been written without Adrienne Rich's poetry. That makes a lot of sense. Now, I like to read this poem because it's a love poem. And it's for my husband, Owen, who's also Muskogee Creek Nation. And, you know, this poem is part of that, researching history and thinking about that walk. And there are a lot of references. Oil flush bust is, you know, of course, Oklahoma, mineral grit, oil, atomic eastbound lands to these atomic. Well, there's, you know, the big atomic, what's the name of it there? And right there outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, excuse me. And I was thinking about how we kind of live in a historic, we can see the layers. Sometimes you can see the layers of history, like you can see layers of rock and talk about different eras. And that's kind of built in here. There's the layer of railroads, stage coaches, Spanish galleons, mound builders, and so on. So it's a love poem. It's also an ode, to his feet and my man's feet. They are heroic roots. You cannot mistake them for any other 6-foot walker. I could find them in a sea of feet, a planet or universe of feet. They kicked the sky at birth in that town his great-grandfather found. My man's feet left childhood past the mineral grit of an oil flush bust to these atomic eastbound lands. His feet are made of his mother's spiritual concern and of his father historic and mindfully upright. What walkers! From mound builder steps that led to the sky maker, past Spanish galleon, stagecoach, and railroad snaker. One generation following another, no other feet but these could bear the rock stubborn loyal bear, towering intelligence and children picker-upper. That is the one who owns these feet. What an anchor his feet provide for his unmatched immense ability and get-up-again-ality. I've danced behind this man in the stomp dance circle, our feet beating rhythm together, man, woman, boy, girl, sun and moon jumper. My man's feet are the sure steps of a father looking after his sons, his daughters, for when he laughs, he opens all the doors of our hearts, even as he forgets to shut them when he leaves. And when he grieves for those he loves, he carves out valleys enough to hold everyone's tears with his feet. These feet, my man's widely humble, ever steady, beautiful, brown feet. I like that one. I guess I could play you. I wrote a song for An American Sunrise, and Let's see. Maybe I'll play that for you now, if you don't mind. I think you can hear it fine through. I know it works fine on Zoom. So let's see if there's. You guys can alert me if you can't hear it. But this is an American Sunrise, the song version. Well. We were running out of breath as we ran to meet ourselves. We were surfacing the edge of our ancestors' fights and ready to strike. It was difficult to lose days in the Indian bar if you were straight. Easy if you played pool and drank to remember to forget. We made plans to be professional, and some of us could sing. We drove to the edge of the mountains with a drum. We made sense of our beautiful crazed lives under the starry stars. We learned the devil from the Christians. We sang we were the heathens but needed to be saved from them. Thin chance. We knew we were all related in this story. A little gin will clarify the dark and make us all feel like dancing. Make us feel like dancing. Make us feel like dancing. Viva, 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 viva. We had something to do with the origins of blues and jazz. I argued with the music as I filled the jukebox with dimes in June. 40 years later, and we still want justice. 40 years later, and we still want justice. We are still America. Way ah, hey ah, way ah, ho. Way ah, hey ah, way ah, ho. Way ah, hey ah, way ah, ho. So that was the guitar solo was Rich Robinson from the Black Crowes, and that was me on saxophone. There's a lot of people that don't know that I have a band and I play music and so on. So that was an American Sunrise. Let's see. I'm going to close the reading part of it, and then we will with this new poem, and then we'll go into the Q&A mode. And so this is a new poem called Without. And I keep a journal. I have them all over the place. And I was trying to write a poem for the death of a beloved uncle, a beloved brother-in-law, and who died of COVID and wouldn't get vaccinated, etc. It's very sad, and we miss him terribly. And I was looking, and then I found this piece in a journal, and I thought, whoa, there's a poem in it. Why didn't I ever turn that into a poem? Well, I turned it into a poem, but I follow a poem where it goes, and it wound up not being about him or for his death, but it did wind up being about death and about what's going on in the country in its own way. And then I wrote a poem for him later, that was more in the, it was for a different kind of audience. But I found this, then I wrote this. This is one of my newest poems called Without. The world will keep trudging through time without us when we lift from the story contest to fly home. We will be as falling stars to those watching from the edge of grief and heartbreak. Maybe then we will see the design of the two-minded creature and know why half the world fights righteously for greedy masters and the other half is nailing it all back together through the smoke of cooking fires, lovers' trysts, and endless human industry. Maybe then, beloved rascal, we will find each other again in the timeless weave of breathing. We will sit under the trees in the shadows of earth's sorrows, watch hyenas drink rain, and laugh. So I guess we will open it up to Q&A for the audience. And so somebody's going to have to facilitate that because I can't see the audience or the questions.
Yeah.
I guess they can ask, or is there a way they can ask?
Yep. If anybody has a question for Joy, they can put it in the comments. But it looks like we have a lot so far. So if you're ready, I'll start you off with your first question. So here's a question. Somebody says, I love how you include some of your poetry ancestors/teachers in An American Sunrise. What have you learned from Rainy Dawn Ortiz or Emily Dickinson?
Rainy is my daughter, and that's my girl. She's a wonderful bead worker, an artist. This is my book, Poet Warrior. That's her art there. That's the water spider who, when the world was flooded, carried a fire ember on her back. She's a poet, and she's a very, very good poet. And I often read my poems to her first. And man, what have I learned from her about poetry? Well, what I've learned from her is she's steadfast and meticulous, and she doesn't forget anything. She holds on to. She's very meticulous. From Emily Dickinson was one of the first poets that I related to as a kid. I had that Louis Untermeyer Golden Treasury of Poetry, and I remember sitting there. I write about it in Poet Warrior, about sitting there with that book on my knees in my favorite hideout place in the closet, and for quiet. I was always looking for quiet or some place to be alone, which was usually outside. And then when I read, I'm nobody, who are you? Are you nobody too? And I was off and running with Emily, because her poems are like nuggets. They're like these wisdom nuggets that, that it's sort of like that tea, you can buy really nice tea that, you put it It's like a tea bud that you put in, and then it opens up and flower
Mhm.
into a flower in your hot water. I think of her poems like that. And from her, I've learned again, there's an exactness to poetry. There's an exactness, and I think most poets, we revise quite a bit. Some things come almost as they are. I was on an event last night with Ed Hirsch and 5 incredible poets, and it was reading from his new book called 100 Poems. I have it right here because I was on that last night. 100 Poems to Break Your Heart by Ed Hirsch. And Naomi Shihab Nye read her poem Kindness, which is one of her most well-known poems. And she was talking about how, because we all revise and and she said that poem came almost by as it was. It was like a woman across the way was telling her that poem after they were going through, traveling, and all of their stuff had been stolen. But the only thing that she had left, because she'd had it in her pocket, were her pen and pen and paper. So anyway, I like that story. Yeah, that story, because we were all astounded because most poems don't come that way.
Yeah, a lot of them, I bet, do not come that way.
No.
So we have another question. So as you know, with the big read, a lot of students in classes are reading An American Sunrise, and
Mhm.
somebody says that their students are loving Directions to You, and
Mhm.
they're really curious about the significance of white, red, yellow, and black.
You would have to ask my daughter. That's her poem.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think now they need to, maybe when the next version comes out. Yeah, I have a poem by Emily Dickinson, and Directions to You. It says it's Rainy Dawn. That's my daughter's poem.
Mhm. Okay,
So
so
they're probably, because I'm Creek and we have certain colors and directions, colors associated with them, and she's also Creek, but she's very close. Like me, I'm very close to my father's tribe, even though through our societies are mostly matriarchal. And the same with her, she's very close to her father's Acoma people. So I imagine that's how that means. I could pull her up here. I could pull her onto the call.
that's okay. Maybe next time we can
Yeah,
do a mother-daughter duo.
I've done that before with her. Uh-huh.
So somebody is asking about how Afrofuturism has influenced your work, if it has influenced your work at all.
Oh, yeah, I haven't been able to go deep into that, or even, I think that's a good question, and I'm somewhat familiar with it, but, I think about, certainly I have been in Poet Warrior. I talk about when I first started writing poetry. I, was certainly, in classes, we learn European verse forms. We learn European, mostly European, but sometimes forms from other places. And I was thinking, well, I wonder. I went to African poetry to find people who were writing who were still close to their cultures and oral cultures. And and then I think about what's native futurism, you
Mm,
know, and I think we're in it. Native
yeah,
indigenous futurism. There's really, you know, all time is kind of present in a way. Mhm. I know that saying that demands some kind of explanation, but not in 10 minutes. Yeah.
no, absolutely not in 10 minutes. So, looking at the actual poem in American Sunrise, a lot of people are just discovering that it is a golden shovel poem. So, if
Yes.
you could talk more about the writing process for that poem, as well as the connection to Gwendolyn Brooks's poem.
Yes, yeah, this is from that famous Gwendolyn Brooks poem, and I at the end of the page, at the end of each line, I put her word, we strike, straight, we sing, sin. I think it's a little off. It's not exact, but I lined up the words of that poem. I don't have it right here.
Mhm.
And, you know, we real cool from the players at the Golden. I think that is the bar, the name of the bar. And so this golden shovel, it was Terrence Hayes that developed this form of taking Gwendolyn Brooks' line and writing poems towards those, towards those with those lines. So a shovel is you kind of fit your poem into that. You kind of fit your poem into that form.
Yeah.
So I've learned. I have not in here. I have a sestina. It's a good practice, and it's good. I like that I kind of make some of my own forms, and I I like that form. You can do it with. I think most of them were originally Gwendolyn Brooks poems, but you could use if you're writing and you're kind of at a loss, or sometimes if you have a poem and it's not quite working, it's good to take another form and work it. It makes you think about the poem differently, and it gives you probably gives you something more to work with as you're trying to find your way to the poem.
Mhm. So sort of going off of finding your way to a poem and talking about poetry, do you use poetry to process current events?
Sometimes, but not always. I mean, I think they find their way in.
Mhm.
I mean, without certainly, not absolutely specifically, but certainly from what we've been going through, with maybe then we will see the design of the two-minded creature, and you think of the bipartisanship and the oppositional stances that have been going on since they were encouraged by certain forces, and know why half the world fights righteously for greedy masters and the other half is nailing it all back together.
Mhm.
It comes directly out of contemporary stories that we see every day. But specifically, yeah, especially some of my earlier poetry, especially around Native events, like the killing of Anime Pictuaquash. And that became a poem, which also became a song.
Yeah, and a lot of our viewers are loving your music. So has music of any kind influenced your writing or inspired you? Or is there a specific kind that you gravitate towards?
Oh man, I listen to a little bit of everything. I'm working on a play right now, a musical play that the characters are a five-member band, young member band, and ultimately through them and through their stories, we will see that Southeastern Native peoples were part of the origin story of blues and jazz. I love jazz. I love the old New Orleans jazz too, but I love music from different forms of East Indian music. I love Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, um, R&B,
Mhm.
etc. I love all kinds of music.
Yeah, a little bit of everything.
Right,
So,
I tend towards jazz. You can hear it in my horn,
mhm.
in my horn playing.
And with your saxophone, somebody asked, is it true that you learned how to play the saxophone in your 40s?
Yeah, when I was about 40.
Okay.
Yeah. I was on the verge of 40 when I picked up a horn.
Had you played any other instrument before then, or what sort of sparked that?
When I was in elementary school, we would meet for band once a week with all the instruments. So I never got one-on-one. And in junior high, I was playing in band, and the teacher said that they needed people to play alto sax, and then he wouldn't let girls play the alto sax. I wanted to play, so I walked away from music. Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, of course, there's a lot of great women sax players. Even though it can be attitude. The thing is you just kind of move.
Mhm.
Keep moving forward. You know all that's there, and you just have to keep moving forward.
And now, finally, this, depending on time, may be our last question, but sticking to the music theme, with your music and poetry, do you feel that combining different mediums of art are able to open new ways to explore life and art that you enjoy?
I think so. It's a way to put together everything. That's how I wound up with my first, my one-woman show, Wings of Night Sky, Wings of Morning Light, because I started realizing that there's music in it, and often when I do, a music performance, I'm up, I'll play music, I'll tell stories around it, talk a little, read poetry and all, and a one-woman show became a way to combine everything. And, just like now with, this musical play I'm working on called We Were There When Jazz Was Invented, it's, I wanna kind of create a new music, but that's very blues and jazz oriented.
Mhm,
I'm going to explore it as my characters explore. And that's what's exciting about it is I can go with them and say, "Okay, I know what they all play, and I know something about their instruments and so on," and so I'm excited about that. Once, I had so many projects and things going on for a month or 2, and now I'm excited about getting back on track with that play. I'm actually a artist in residence right now for Theater Squared in Fayetteville, Arkansas.
oh.
Even though I'm right here. Even though I'm here, I've gone out there and I'll be going back and forth.
Okay, and finally, as we're wrapping things up, is there by any chance we could ask you for one more song or one more poem?
Well, I guess if we're going out, I can play another song. I was trying to see which one of these is uh, in this book. I don't know if there are any other of these. Actually, the song I sang at the beginning is in here. Well, I will play. I guess the thing is, do we say goodnight here and then I just play it out, or how are we gonna do this?
Um, yeah, we could do that.
Maybe we should do that,
Mhm. So
and then
I'll
okay, go ahead.
I'll say goodnight here. Thank you so much for reading your poetry and talking to us. And then I'll thank everybody for joining who's online for joining us this evening. And thank you, Joy, again for speaking with us. And thank you to the Jack Riddle Visiting Writers Series for sponsoring this event. Uh, Please join us for other events such as From Wilder's Little House on the Prairie to Joy Harjo's American Sunrise, Words Matter with Debbie Reese on November 10th. And for more events and information, please check out our website, bigreadlakeshore.com. So play us out, Joy.
Okay, thank you so much. I was really happy to join you guys tonight.
Mhm.
This morning I pray for my enemies. Thank you. This morning I pray for my enemies. And whom do I call my enemy? An enemy must be worthy of engagement. I turn in the direction of the sun and keep walking. It's the heart that asks the question, not my furious mind. The heart is the smaller cousin of the sun. It sees and knows everything. It hears the gnashing, even as it hears the blessing. The door to the mind should only open from the heart. An enemy who gets in risks the danger of becoming a friend. This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? Okay, thank you.